When you need mealtime inspiration, it's worth shopping Kroger for thousands of appetizing ingredients that inspire countless mouth-watering meals. And no matter what tasty choice you make, you'll enjoy our everyday low prices. Plus, extra ways to save, like digital coupons worth over $600 each week and up to $1 off per gallon at the pump with points. So you can get big flavors and big savings. Kroger, fresh for everyone. Fuel restrictions apply.
There are a lot of beaches out there, but only one is the beach. Myrtle Beach, South Carolina is 60 miles where you belong. Plan your getaway to the beach at visitmyrtlebeach.com.
This is what you do when you've just found that statement handbag on eBay and you want to build an entire wardrobe around it. You start selling to keep buying. Yep, on eBay. Over that all-black everything phase, list it and buy all the color. Feeling more vintage than ever? It's out with the new and in with the pre-loved. Next thing you know, you've refreshed your wardrobe basically without spending a dime. Yeah, eBay, the place to buy and sell new, pre-loved, vintage, and rare fashion.
Minus 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5.
That's one small step.
One eyewitness, one major pop cultural event. You Had to Be There uncovers stories that shed light on our most iconic moments.
Like the real enemy.
Each episode, our host, Julia Thompson, takes on the task of finding and interviewing one person within 48 hours who was there, with no idea what their event will be. Come along for the ride.
Julia, hey, it's Webb. You ready for your assignment?
Yep.
Okay. Your assignment for this episode of You Had to Be There is to find an eyewitness who was at 1520 Sedgwick Avenue on August 11th, 1973, when DJ Kool Herc and his sister, Cindy Campbell, threw a back-to-school party, which is the moment that is commonly considered the birth of hip-hop. Starting now, you have 48 hours to find someone who was there and interview them. Good luck.
My name is Julia Thompson, and I am the host of You Had to Be There. I love hip-hop. I especially loved it in high school. But this party, an after-school party, never heard of it. So I find this clip of Cindy Campbell, Herc's sister, reflecting back on the party she is responsible for throwing in an ABC News interview from the summer of 2023, when hip-hop had its 50th anniversary.
I started organizing this party. Where am I going to get the music from? Herc had all the equipment in his room. So I knew he was going to be playing the music. How much are we going to charge people? Charge 25 cents for girls, 50 cents for fellas. How do you promote it now? Had index cards. Before there were flyers, there were index cards. And on the top, we always gave it a title, which was whatever the current song was. And I put Kool Herc's name on it because he's going to be the DJ. And he was pretty popular in the neighborhood and in school. So they were really coming, to see Kool Herc play.
I learned that the party is famous for this technique called the merry-go-round that Herc invented. I decided to call my DJ friend, Franz, who will definitely be able to give me some background on this and send me in the right direction. We hung out back in the mid-aughts. He worked at a vintage store called The Thing, which had a huge record trove that was totally unorganized and in a very dusty basement. He was dating my roommate at the time, and every few days he would drop off some obscure disco record, and we'd all sit around and listen to it on the Fisher-Price record player he gifted her. He is one of those record store brainiac types that would definitely help me, but to be totally honest, I also just fancied a catch-up. We hadn't spoken in a long time.
My name is Franz. I'm a DJ based in New York.
Would you be able to give me like a boilerplate definition of hip-hop?
Ooh. Let's see if I can do this one quickly.
You don't have to do it quickly either. You can just talk.
I mean, not quickly, but nice and wrapped up. I'd say now. Yeah, I mean, hip hop is a subculture born in New York City, the Bronx, that ties together rap, breakdancing, graffiti to some extent. I mean, that's just an asterisk on there because, that predates hip hop really. DJing and community involvement. That's hip hop.
Well said. Okay, cool. So for you, What's your association with like where it began? Do you think that there's a way to kind of trace that?
For me?
Sure, yeah.
I have no ties to the Bronx. I grew up in Brooklyn to Haitian-born immigrants. You know, Kool Herc is Jamaican and settled in the Bronx as a youth, I suppose. So there's no, like, I have no particular tie-in to that sort of arc of hip-hop. The date that's given for, like, you know, the party on Sedgwick Avenue is August 11th, 1973. This was like just before the fiscal crisis in New York City. I think John Lindsay was at the tail end of his tenure as mayor. But what I remember, you know, reading is that like what makes that event significant was the sort of use of the merry-go-round technique, where he's just like extending breaks. You know, they have to break on Give It Up and Turn It Loose. And he'd just have two copies of it and just keep running the break over and over and then moving to a different break beat like Bongo Rock or Mondays Bra. And that was like, you know, the hot section of the record for, you know, folks to like really get loose on the dance floor.
Here's a clip of Herc talking about the merry-go-round technique.
One night, I'm waiting for the record to play out. I said, I wonder if I put that to myself. I said, if they're waiting for this particular break and I have a couple more records that's got the same breakup in it, I wonder how would it be if I put them all together. And I told them, I said, I'm going to try something new tonight. I'm going to call it a merry-go-round.
As a DJ, like what other music was happening at that time in New York in the early 70s?
You had funk. You had Philly soul, but without the rhythm section of Harris, Baker, Young. I don't think that was like sort of happening just yet. So it was mostly, you know, funk and soul, but also Latin music, like Afro-Latin music. Think like Fania Records or Ansonia. And, you know, these were pretty like funky, very like groovy records, you know? So a lot of like Afro-Latin, a lot of funk and soul. I'm sure there's like one or two, you know, funk rock records that, you know, made the cut from. An example would be Titanic, this, I believe, Dutch funk rock band. Things like that would slip in. And, you know, this was like a couple of years after The Loft had kicked off, which was another party downtown started by David Mancuso. So there's a significant overlap in the selection of, you know, really funky party music. So a lot of what you'd hear downtown would end up uptown. The stuff that made sense to, you know, to the Bronx or I guess to Kool Herc, you know, whatever you gravitated towards, he, you know, picked up on and started to like pump that out.
Would he go to the Loft?
I've never heard of him, you know, going there, but you know, as music gets played in clubs, you know, people talk. They want to know what was played, and you know, music like food, if it's good, it is to be shared. So it ends up in the shops. It ends up, you know, in people's homes and on the radio.
So there was so much just going on in New York at that time. I guess I just think history is funny, how we attach ourselves to singular events that define entire genres and movements. Yeah. Were you at all around for any of the 50th anniversary hip hop things?
I didn't attend any of those events, but yeah, I mean, I was in town when all of that was popping off. But yeah, I didn't go to any of those shows.
What was your impression, like from a DJ point of view? Dance music, underground DJ point of view?
I mean, I thought it was cool that this was being celebrated, but for me, like, you know, when the Library of Congress like preserves records, right? And every year there's like a list that enters the National Recording Registry. And I think for the 50th, like, I think a sort of like a look back on what's been preserved so far would have been like really great, you know, instead of keeping it as sort of like, all right, this is a New York insular thing and let's celebrate ourselves. And like, yes, let's celebrate the accomplishment of hip hop going global, but let's take a look and see how deeply, we've made an impression on this country, so much that, we're preserving these recordings, That I would have loved.
So can you give me some tangible examples of that? That's so interesting, but it's very heady. Like specific records or how that would be approached?
Yeah. So I'm pulling up the National Recording Registry of the U.S. and they first started doing this around 2002. And it looks like the first hip hop recording that made it to the registry is The Message by Grandmaster Flash and the Furious Five.
Here's an excerpt of The Message.
It's like a jungle sometimes, it makes me wonder how I keep from going under. It's like a jungle sometimes, it makes me wonder how I keep from going under.
Great record, really nice, but, I would have liked something that really documented the scene, and there are recordings of parties that exist on record. So, you hear the DJ, throwing, funk and disco breaks and things like that. And you hear MCs just ripping it up, which is great because hip hop on a recording like The Message or even like Rapper's Delight, that's a very polished sort of package. But a recording of the sort of raw event, as it actually happened, that's how you really preserve the history, And I would have loved to see that enter the registry or, put some focus on hey, we actually do have a proper document of what it was, of what was going on.
That's so interesting. So yeah, the relationship to what it actually is, which isn't necessarily, it's not a song, it's not a record, it's a moment, it's a party.
Yeah, all these people together in a room, just to because the product, a record coming out, that's the invention. Well, what came before it was just the emergence,
So in the way it only exists as the recording itself.
Yeah. Just before it was a genre, a thing on a record, it was just a hyper-localized cultural practice.
I asked Franz if he has any leads.
Yeah, I mean, I think there is some Super 8 footage of, the early parties. That's what I've heard, but I don't know. If you ever get to Kool Herc or or anyone in his circle, definitely have a chat about that. I mean, I would love to see what that was like.
Yeah, I'll ask about that for sure. And I will eventually get to someone. So we'll see.
I hope you do. Yeah, I was thinking, shit, who can you talk to who can maybe put you on a closer path? I was at a book launch event for the Ramel Z book that dropped, and it was Jeff Mao, who's the co-editor of the book, but Charlie Ahern was there, and Lee Quinones was there, and those folks know the older folks. So if you can get to Charlie Ahern, who did...
That's a great idea.
Yeah, who did Wild Style, grab his hair and be like, hey, who from back then who might be around, because that was, 50 years, right?
Yeah.
So if you had a teenager running around, because this was a back to school party.
That's the plan. But I like this idea of reaching out to Charlie. I like that idea.
Yeah, I would get on that ASAP.
Yeah, and then my friend was saying, told me to reach out to, I guess, the Museum of Hip Hop. There's there's an archivist there, so I reached out to them. And then I don't know if you remember Carrie Clark. She works at this place called The Point in the South Bronx. But she has a bunch of friends, and she's 70, so she has a bunch of friends. She lives up there.
She is going to know.
Carrie had a party for my friends around the same time I was kicking around with Franz, at her loft in the Bronx. She's a painter and has been head of the visual arts programming at this place called The Point for decades. It's a cultural and economic revitalization center, art center of sorts, in the Hunts Point section of the Bronx. Tons of artists, musicians, and the likes have been a part of this community. So at the very least, Carrie was hooked up with a bunch of Bronx-born artists that might have been at the Herc party, or at least would certainly know about it. I WhatsApp her for leads. She put out a bunch of feelers. I email Wild Styles director Charlie Ahern, legendary early hip-hop photographer Joe Conzo, and the media liaison from the Hip Hop Museum in the Bronx. Day one done, no leads, but confident that one of these contacts will come through, especially the Carrie Clark ones. I wake up the next morning to an empty inbox. Nothing in the afternoon. I check in with Carrie, and she says she found someone who wants to talk. She connects me with this Bronx-born graffiti artist, designer, and comic book writer, Eric Orr. He writes, I've never been to a party at 1520 Sedgwick Avenue back in the 70s. My first contact with Kool Herc was at a club on Jerome Avenue in the late 70s. Carrie is very sweet to suggest speaking to me, but my hip-hop history is on the east side of the Bronx, Bronx River to be exact. I grew up in the 70s hip-hop movement with Africa Bambaataa, Zulu Nation, and the Bronx River Projects. I follow up with him a bunch of times to see if he'll talk to me anyway. Okay, he's too busy. I get the message. Carrie suggests I go to this party up in the Bronx called Graffiti for Democracy that evening. Eric will be there, and she says, I'm sure you'll find someone who was at that Herc event. This is my last chance. I drive up to the Bronx. I get there. The party's full of DJs and graffiti artists and b-boys and b-girls and random art people from the community. I see Carrie, give her a hug. It was really good to connect, but I had business to take care of. I talked to maybe a dozen people, all asking, did they know someone who was at the Herc party? Were they at the Herc party themselves? I met many people who went to Herc parties, but never the 1973 after-school party. I met many people who grew up in other projects in the Bronx and heard stories of their neighborhood DJs, supposedly breaking beats at the same time as Herc. That was all very interesting, but I needed someone who was at that DJ Herc party to be able to say I completed this assignment. I guess it was kind of cool that I was getting an education in hip-hop, even though I wasn't finding someone. But then I was just starting to feel like I have no idea where hip-hop started. Like, was this even real? And who cares about Herc? As I'm leaving the party, a person named Patricia calls out to me. Oh yeah, they're a bunch of old heads, the Herc crew. They are all at another party in East Harlem. I'll hook you up. I'll put you in touch with them. Let me get your number. I can't believe this is happening. She's going to be the one that helps me get to my person. I drive back to Brooklyn and go to bed. That morning, I was at the end of my road, and I had nothing. Patricia hadn't texted me back yet. I bump her, crickets. I bump her again, crickets. In my final hours, Webb throws me a line. A music insider friend who has Herc's contacts, his phone contacts. It was like a contact card that said DJ Kool Herc. Oh, fuck. Maybe this won't be a failure after all. I take a few deep breaths and call him.
We're sorry. You have reached a number that has been disconnected or is no longer in service. If you feel you have reached this recording in error, please check the number.
Shit. The first you had to be there, where I come up with nothing. So, should I end the episode here? No, there's definitely more to this story. I just can't let it go. Why was this particular party so damn hard? And with all these people telling me about so many DJs and iconic moments in hip-hop, why was this after-school party the one that everybody cared about? Was Herc's invention of the merry-go-round really ground zero for hip-hop? Finally, the media liaison at the Hip Hop Museum put me in touch with Paradise Gray, current chief curator at the museum, author, hip-hop collector, and music producer. Maybe he would have the answers I was looking for.
Peace, this is Paradise Gray, the chief curator of the Hip Hop Museum being built in the Bronx. Hip-hop collector, manager, promoter, artist, producer, and your host with the most of the world-famous Latin Quarter, the incubator of the golden era of hip-hop. Well, my daughter told you that I wasn't exactly at the Herc party, but I have attended Herc parties. And if you're talking about the August 11th, 1973 Herc party?
Yes.
Is that what you're talking about?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Well, I have a different opinion about that party.
No, I know, and I want to get into that opinion, but can I ask you first if you were there?
No, but I grew up in the High Bridge area, which is, I live less than a mile from 1520 Sedgwick and Cedar. And I know some things about that party. You never saw the index card that's like a flyer for that party?
No.
Have you seen the Joe Gonzo's book, Born in the Bronx?
I have not.
Well, Joe Gonzo's book, Born in the Bronx, is the publication that really blew that index card up. But that's the only surviving so-called proof of that party. But the problem is that index card is a fake.
Interesting.
The reason how I know that the index card is a fake is because when I pressed Joe Gonzo about it, he admitted to me that it was a facsimile. And I had asked Kool Herc about it, and he said that it wasn't the original. And it has Coke Rock on the flyer in 1973, and Coke Rock was not a part of Kool Herc's crew yet in 73.
So what do you think happened on August 13th, 1973?
I think it was a house party, not unlike any other house party going down in the Bronx.
Got it.
I think that August 11th, 1973 is a good marker, but it's not an accurate indication of the first party of hip-hop. That's not true.
So why do you think people call it that?
Because Joe Gonzo put that flyer out there, and there was rumors about the thing, and everybody was grabbing for, redux history? You know, trying to go back in time and move dates around.
So the photographer Paradise is referring to is internationally acclaimed hip-hop photographer Joe Gonzo, also a man who spent decades as a firefighter medic and 8 years as a firefighter union leader, and someone who agreed to get on the phone with me to talk about my You Had to Be There troubles.
My name is Joe Gonzo, man who took hip-hop's baby pictures. I'm just a humble kid from the Bronx, and I'm grateful and humbled that I've found a career in love and passion in photography. You're talking about August 11th, 1973.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know anybody that was there, and I wasn't even there. So I'm so entrenched in the hip-hop culture. To this day, I'm 61 years old, and I still haven't met anybody that was actually at this back-to-school birthplace, which is weird.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, listen, I almost think it's an urban myth, you know what I mean? Because there really hasn't been any artifacts to prove that this day actually happened. There are flyers or index cards to say that it happened, but those have been debunked as fake and stuff. But I actually haven't met anybody that's been there, and I know pretty much everybody in the culture from day one.
So that includes Herc himself.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I know Herc. I've known Herc for 40 plus years, but I've never really sat down with him and asked him, what happened this day. I even know his sister, Cindy. So, they can say what they want, but I would have been 10 years old on this date. And I certainly wasn't there. I had started my photography career maybe a year or two later on, but I still haven't met anybody from Grandmaster Caz to Flash and those guys to Theodore to, you name it.
Back to Paradise.
I'll rewind. The legend of Kool Herc, is legitimate. Kool Herc was one of the first DJs to do hip hop the way he did, but he was not the only one. The legend of Kool Herc has Kool Herc winning early battles by turning up the knobs of his power amps on DJs who couldn't compete with the power of the Herculoid sound system, which was the power amps and big speakers that Kool Herc had. So right there, it tells you that Kool Herc had rivals and contemporaries. So you hear the stories about Kool Herc turning the knobs up on these DJs, but you never hear the names of who those DJs were or what their stories was. And there was a DJ by the name of Smokey, a.k.a. DJ Smoke, who had a crew called the Smokatrons that were DJ Smokey's version of B-boys and B-girls. And Smokey and his crew, the Master Plan Bunch, they were much better DJs and much better on the turntables than Kool Herc was. But Kool Herc had the powerful sound system, and he would blow them away. But you don't hear too much about DJ Smokey.
What about the whole merry-go-round technique? Is that also a legend in terms of him being the originator?
Yes, it is. Because Kool Herc wasn't that good of a DJ. And somebody should show me an example of Kool Herc in 1973 doing the merry-go-round. I've never heard it.
Why do you think that the press attributed the merry-go-round to Herc?
Because Herc said that he did it.
Yeah.
But find the earliest date that Herc started talking about the merry-go-round.
Interesting.
I think that in the 70s and the 80s, Herc wasn't talking about the merry-go-round. I didn't even hear that term until, the 2000s. So the couple of things I rely upon hip-hop flyers, even though I just proved that the flyers could be deceptive, as in the fake August 11th, 1973 flyer.
Yeah.
But, there's a whole lot to the story that's missing. And that's the one thing I love about the story of hip-hop. It's not an arbitrary story. Hip-hop is not created in the Bronx from nothing. Nothing could be further from the truth. That's the greatest exaggeration that ever existed. The elements of hip-hop, all 5 of the original elements, they existed since the beginning of time. The African djembe was the first representation of the turntables and the DJ. And the African griot, the storyteller, was the first MC. And, the Egyptians wrote on the walls of the pyramids in Kemet, let alone cavemen, Aztecs, and many other indigenous peoples who wrote on walls. That's the foundation of graffiti. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And, there's an ancient African proverb that says, if you can walk, you can dance. If you can talk, you can sing. And we've been dancing in praise of the Creator forever. And there are black and white films and movies from the 20s even that showed b-boying in ciphers. Like right out on the plantation, they were depicting these things. So these elements were brought together in the Bronx by the socio-political and economic pressures of the times of the 60s and 70s. But we can't honestly talk about the foundations of hip hop without George Clinton, James Brown, Sly and the Family Stone, Earth, Wind and Fire, the Motown sound, the Stax Boat sound, Pig Meat Markham, Moms Mabley, Millie Jackson, and hundreds, maybe even thousands of our ancestors who taught us the rhythm of hip hop. They showed us the swag. They taught these things to us. We did not invent them. I say the only thing that we actually created was scratching. Everything else was a part of the Afro-Indigenous culture. And I consider hip hop to be the repository of Afro-Indigenous culture worldwide.
Wow.
The early writers, from Brian Coleman to other early writers who wrote for the Village Voice and the early newspapers and publications that originally wrote about hip hop, they came to the Bronx and they talked to a certain amount of people. The people who they didn't talk to, the rest of the people who read that and go running behind the tall tales and the legends, they never went into the Bronx curious about Pete DJ Jones. Pete DJ Jones was much more popular in the Bronx and New York than Kool Herc was. And, he played some breakbeats too, but not as much as Herc did. But he played disco most of the time. But he can't be written out of the equation because he mentored Curtis Blow, Grandmaster Flash, Hollywood, and Lovebug Starsky. So how can he not be hip-hop? You also don't hear many stories, if any, about Disco King Mario from the Bronx Dale Projects, who was DJing before Herc and Bam.
Blinds.com is kicking off the savings early with Black Friday mega deals all month long. A Blinds.com design expert can help you make the perfect selection on your schedule. We can even handle everything from measure to your whole home installed for just one low cost. With over 25 million windows covered, Blinds.com is the #1 online retailer of custom window coverings. Get up to 45% off site-wide, plus premium doorbusters and a free professional measure. Now at Blinds.com. Rules and restrictions may apply.
There are a lot of beaches out there, but only one is the beach. Myrtle Beach has 60 miles of ocean views, over 2,000 restaurants, hundreds of attractions, and live music all day and night. It's where your best self comes out and where trips turn into tradition. You belong at the beach. Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. Plan your getaway at visitmyrtlebeach.com.
This episode is brought to you by Allstate. Some people just know they could save hundreds on car insurance by checking Allstate first. Like to check the date of the big game first before you accidentally buy tickets on your 20th wedding anniversary and have to spend the next 20 years of your marriage making up for it. Yeah, checking first is smart. So check Allstate first for a quote that could save you hundreds. You're in good hands with Allstate. Savings vary. Terms apply. Allstate Fire and Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Northbrook, Illinois.
This is the sound of your ride home with Dad after he caught you vaping. Awkward, isn't it? Most vapes contain seriously addictive levels of nicotine and disappointment. Know the real cost of vapes. Brought to you by the FDA.
Back to Joe Conzo.
Julia, it has evolved. When I first started my adventure into photography, I didn't set out to be a hip-hop photographer. It just so happened that I was coined by the New York Times the man who took hip-hop's baby pictures because I had some of the earliest images of the culture. Before it was called hip-hop. But, I've always said, there's dozens and dozens of photographs that predate my photographs. But the difference is, I was a young kid who had a love and passion of photography, and I didn't just take pictures. I developed them. I went to school for photography. I had my own darkroom. So, that sets me apart from being somebody that took pictures with their uncle's 110 Instamatic camera, Kodak camera, than somebody who studied the craft, and, several authors have pointed out, Joe came from within the culture of hip hop. He wasn't working for a newspaper and sent uptown to take pictures of, little blacks and Puerto Ricans spinning on their heads and writing on the walls. So that's what sets me apart from a lot of the most established hip hop photographers who there aren't that many. Martha Cooper, Henry Chalfant, Charlie Ahern, we're all good friends. We've all done exhibitions together and traveled the world doing exhibitions. But they'll tell you that Joe came from within the culture and we were just outsiders documenting this thing called hip hop. So I was born in the Bronx. Well, actually, listen, even though I represent the Bronx, my logo is called Born in the Bronx. I have it tattooed on my arm. It's on my car. It's my license plate, this, that, and the other. I was actually born in Flower Fifth Avenue Hospital in Manhattan. Only because my dad was in the military at the time, and that's where they accepted the GI Bill. So, but I was born and raised in the Bronx for, God, my entire life.
What part of the Bronx?
South Bronx, St. Mary Projects, 149th Street and Jackson Avenue, right by St. Mary's Park. And I'm the oldest of 5 kids. And my mother basically raised 5 kids by herself. And I come from a very community activist political family in the Bronx. My grandmother was affectionately known as the Hell Lady of the Bronx, Dr. Evelina Antonetti. I developed a love and passion for photography. I was a chubby little kid growing up, and I've said this 1,000 times, with an Angela Davis afro, and found my little niche in taking pictures. And my mother supported it. And I just was taking pictures in the neighborhood. I was the junior high school photographer, the high school photographer, and it was in high school that I got invited by 2 of my classmates to take pictures of this group that they were putting together called the Kool Herc Brothers. It was Easy A.D. and DJ Tony Tone who invited me to go take pictures one night up in North Bronx at the T Connection where they were performing. And the rest is history. I started traveling with them locally to their shows, tri-state, and got to take pictures of Kool Herc, Africa Bambaataa, the Funky 4+1, you name it, all the bricklayers, so to speak, of the music part of the culture.
Back to Paradise.
In the Bronx, there was a lot of live bands that used to come out with their equipment in the 60s and 70s. So the live bands, they basically paved the way for the DJ. When the DJ took over from the live bands, the DJs started coming outside with their equipment. Now, most DJs in New York before 1980 were so-called disco DJs, because disco is the bastard father of hip-hop. Disco, funk, R&B, jazz, and gospel. We rely heavily on the rhythms and the creativity of those ancestors to help us create that. Now, Grandmaster Flowers from Brooklyn and Pete DJ Jones from the Bronx were 2 of the most popular mobile DJs in New York City, bar none. So they had these mobile sound systems, and they would travel around from borough to borough doing parties at Reef Beach, doing parties in the various New York City parks. And there was hundreds of different parties with many promoters and many DJs doing incredible things.
Back to Joe.
Well, I mean, listen, Herc was this big, mythical, 10-foot tall Jamaican DJ, that everybody spoke about. A, because he had the largest sound system going on at the time. And B, he was playing music that pretty much nobody else even heard. And if you did hear about it, he was extending those bits and pieces of a song, for the crowd, for the people in attendance. So that's why he's known to be the father of hip hop, at least DJ, the rap DJ part of it.
I heard too there are other people doing that sort of merry-go-round style. Like he wasn't the only one.
I mean, listen, there's a half dozen DJs at the same time doing the same thing that don't have the reputation that Herc has. There's DJs smoking the Smokatrons on the west side of the Bronx, where I grew up at. There's so many, Disco King Mario, Soundview Projects, Bronx River, Bronxdale Projects, but again, if you didn't have people speaking about them, there was never a legacy that preceded them. You know what I mean?
Back to Paradise Gray.
We didn't even call it hip hop intentionally as a culture or music until the early 80s.
How did it get its name in the early 80s?
I don't know, but we just called it jamming, or rocking, or we're coming out with the equipment. We didn't have a specific word for hip hop because it was just a normal part of Black culture, everyday Black culture. After the Sugar Hill Gang said hip hop, hit it to the hip, hip hop, you don't stop the rocker. After that, it caught on as hip hop.
What are your thoughts on that song?
On that song?
Yeah.
I think it was a great song. It was long, 15 minutes, like the Isaac Hayes and Barry White and James Brown records from back in those days. You know what I'm saying? I think it was a great song. It was a right bit of exploitation at the right time.
Yeah, that makes sense. So one of the things that's come up is this idea of the party versus the recording.
Right.
Could you talk a little bit about that?
Well, the party, the rhymes were a lot shorter in the early days. The MC first came on the scene just as somebody that was speaking on the mic and giving shout outs, telling the girls, to say ow, telling the homeboys to say ho and clap your hands. And most of the time the MC was just there to say, hey, yo, John, your mama here to pick you up. She at the front door. Or, hey, whoever's driving that Honda out there, that Cadillac, you about to get towed, you got to move your car. It was that kind of thing. But it progressed and the rhymes got more complex as the MCs got more intelligent and more witty. I attribute Grandmaster Melly Mel, Grandmaster Kaz, with being the original ones to really take that lyricism in hip hop to another level, take the entertainment value and take it to another level.
That's cool. So then what about the word hip hop? When did it pop up?
Well, the first time I consciously heard hip hop was The Last Poets. There's a rumor that said the story says either Hollywood or the brother from Grandmaster Flash and the Furious Five, Cowboy. They said that Cowboy was doing a party and his cousin was in the army and he kept saying hip hop because his cousin was leaving for the army. But The Last Poets, they actually used the Black Army cadence. hip, him live hop, hip, him live hop. That was the first time I heard hip hop. You know, it was sang with the army cadence, so it would probably make sense that Cowboy was singing the cadence from The Last Poets when he was singing it.
So, in the spirit of my podcast, which is people telling stories of actual events they were at, would you be able to describe being at a specific party, maybe one that had the biggest impression on you when you were young? It could actually even be when you're older.
Well, Disco King Mario used to bring his equipment outside in the park and the Bronxdale projects, you know, and I think that 1520 Sedgwick and Cedar is an important marker in hip hop, but 1715 Bruckner Boulevard is an equal landmark. That's where Disco King Mario lived. And he used to come outside in the little park there with his equipment, and he would blast the music. And he was such a good-looking guy. He was well-dressed, and he could dance his butt off. And, you know, in the middle of his set, when the women would be going crazy, he would jump out from behind the turntables onto the dance floor, and the women would surround him, and he would do a dance called a snake, and he would do these wiggles and stuff, and the women would go crazy. And me being a little nappy-headed, ashy-skinned, brown-skinned boy, I used to, like, be amazed. I wanted the girls to go crazy for me like that, too.
Did they eventually?
Oh, absolutely. That's why they call me Paradise.
So were you intimidated by him? Like, because you were younger.
No.
So how did you get to talking to him?
Mario lived in my building. I saw him every day. And when I was 7 years old, he allowed me to clean up his records and help him carry his records and his equipment around. So I got the utmost respect as a little dude because I knew how to shut my mouth, sit in the corner, observe and learn, speak when spoken to, and make myself helpful.
So where would he get his records?
Oh, there was hundreds of places to get records in New York. Record stores, record pools. We would shop for our records, and there was a dope record pool in the Bronx Terminal Market. You know, there was record stores all over the place. And even Crazy Eddie sold records. The Crazy Eddie was an electronics distributor who sold, vinyl and DJ equipment.
So he'd just be ahead of the radio stations and all that.
Oh yeah, the radio back in them days, it was AM radio. It wasn't no black radio stations yet. You know, we had like disco and Quiet Storm, you know, but as far as music that young people gravitate to, what we were doing in the streets, in the parks, and in the schools and in house parties, you couldn't get that music anywhere else, but you had to show up in the street to get it. You had to come to us to get it. Or you could find, there was people like this guy called the Tape Master who would go to all the jams and stand in front of the speakers with a recorder and record a lot of the jams. That's how a lot of hip hop got distributed in those early days, on the early mixtapes, the early cassettes by the, Tape King and others like him. There was a DJ in my community, High Bridge, by the name of the Grand Imperial JC. And him and Grand Mixer DXT, to me, were the two best DJs back in the day. The difference between JC, DXT, and everybody else was that JC and DXT were actual percussionists. They were live drummers in live bands. So their hand-eye coordination and their dexterity was way better than everybody else's. So what did one of their parties look like? Could you describe it? Oh, yeah. Well, we would, wake up in the afternoon, early afternoon, getting all the records together, carry I used to carry the records and the equipment down and help set it up for the jam. The community would be electric when people saw us carrying the speakers and carrying the the records out of the house and setting it up, the whole community would be buzzing with electricity, and everybody would make money. The barbershops, the salons, the nail salons and hair salons, all of the bodegas would make money that day. The clothing stores, the shoe stores, everybody would try to get fresh because we knew that jam was coming and we wanted to look good for the ladies that we knew was going to come walking from miles around to that party. For the most part, there was no violence. There was a lot of dancing and laughter. You know what I'm saying? It was a real community event.
What were the flyers like? Because I know that's part of your a big part of your collection, right?
But the flyers back then were amazing. You know, that was one of the things that really, really hooked me on hip hop, because I was a comic book collector, and the names and the images on hip hop flyers reminded me of comic books. You know, Grandmaster Flash, Grand Wizard Theodore, you know, and the art on the flyers were amazing. You know, Phase 2 was amazing artists. There was a lot of incredible artists doing their art back in those days. And still to this day, I love like really going over hip hop flyers, and I'm blind now, so I can't see them anymore. But having my partner Pete describe flyers to me that I've never seen before, it still excites me, and I still love collecting them, just like I used to collect baseball cards.
Yeah. So, what about, how did the different parties, because you have so many crews and different DJs, some of whom move around, like, would people go to different crew, different party, different locations? Like, if you were living in the Bronx?
Well, we definitely did. You know, I used to go to Brooklyn to visit my uncles and my grandparents, and, you know, I would wind up at different jams and Bed-Stuy and different places, you know what I'm saying? Crown Heights, you know, hip hop was popping everywhere. When these guys turned their equipment on, people hear it for miles, and everybody get on the phone, you know, telegraph, telephone, and tell a friend. The word of mouth got the people to these parties with the flyers.
So were you unique in that you went to other boroughs? Would you say the majority of people where you grew up would stick to parties uptown, or was it common to go to?
I think me and my crew was unique. I got off the porch at an early age, and I was in the clubs in Manhattan when I was an early teenager, you know, dancing, you know, b-boying and dancing like Michael Jackson in Studio 54, the Palladium, the Fun House, the Roxy, Harlem World, the Ecstasy Garage. There was so many venues. You know, we had sneakers on. You couldn't get in no parties with sneakers on. You had to have slippery bottom shoes, a silk shirt, maybe a hat and a jacket on to get in these clubs. So a lot of us second generation hip hop, we stood across the street and we heard the music when they opened the doors, and we heard it through the windows because the sound systems were so loud. So we got to experience hip hop in that way. It wasn't until like the early 80s that we really started being able to get in actual clubs. You know, in the Bronx, there was a lot of makeshift clubs, and we did parties at PALs and at the Cadet Corps. And there was even a place called the Burger King Disco, which a guy who worked at Burger King, after they would close, he would move the tables and chairs, and they would do jams inside the Burger King. You know, the skating rinks let us do our jams. And where would we be without the many schools that opened up their auditoriums and their gymnasiums and allowed us to do early hip hop parties?
Back to Joe. Like, did you go downtown, uptown? I mean, I assume you did by your photographs.
I pretty much went everywhere they went. The Kool Herc brothers went. You know, it was, Julia, it was about Friday nights and Saturday nights. That's it. It wasn't about record deals. It wasn't about anything else. It was about competition. Friday night, which school gymnasium they're going to perform in, which park they're going to perform in, which PAL, police athletic league they're going to perform in. And it was just a competition between crews, so to speak. And the Kool Crush, who really only did about 3 songs that were put on wax, had the most sophisticated routines and stage presence that they're talked about and sung about by some of the biggest rap artists today.
Yeah, what would you say if someone were to ask you, what is hip hop? What would you say?
Well, if we're talking about the music aspect, hip hop, the rap music is encompasses everything. If we're talking about the culture itself, rap music, graffiti, DJing, MCing, love, peace, and happiness, knowledge. It's just a way of living. It's fashion. It's the way of thinking. I'm 61 years old. I still wear Nike sneakers, jeans, jean jackets. I can put on a suit and tie, which I did for the last 8 years of my career with the New York City Fire Department as the vice president. But it's just a way of living. It's just a culture that you embrace.
Back to Paradise Gray. When the anniversary happens, what are your thoughts on the 50th anniversary? Because you're saying that there's not really an actual...
I thought it was incredible. I think that August 11, 1973 is an arbitrary date, but we use it in hip-hop as a marker. Everything has to have a marker somewhere or other, and I cannot and I will not try to discredit, Kool Herc's legacy or the legacy of the Bronx, but like I said, there's a lot more to the story.
So you think with time that will be part of, that will be considered, that will be more mainstream. People will have a better understanding of hip hop through the parties versus record labels publishing songs.
Yeah, it was on the way down. Once the major labels got involved in hip hop, everything started to spiral downward. We was hip hop in the streets, not hip hop industry. And that's why the early days got so lost, because we didn't know that we were doing something different and special. We knew that we were just in the moment doing it.
Yeah.
We had no idea we were creating a multi-billion-dollar industry.
So wild to think of. We
spent more money than we made.
Yeah. How does that feel?
It feels great,
Yeah.
At one point, it feels bad because you know that you were exploited and, not really paid for your creativity. But we didn't do it for money anyway.
Back to Joe. So what do you think about people, this 50-year anniversary and people putting so much emphasis on this one party that kind of is a myth?
But when's the birth? When is the birth date of jazz? When is the birth date of rock and roll? When is the birth date of any genre of music? Do we actually celebrate that? I think it just became a commodity when this 50-year, so-called 50-year anniversary came up of hip-hop. It just gave people an opportunity to capitalize off of it.
That makes sense.
Do we celebrate the birth of jazz? Do we celebrate the birth of rock and roll? It's just, I don't know.
Yeah.
Did I play along with it? Yes, I did. Because I love the culture so much. But, so many different parts of the culture were going on long before this, mythical date of August 11th, 1973. So, everybody was talking about Herc. Even though there was a half dozen other DJs doing the same thing, probably before Herc, during Herc, and after Herc. So is there a definitive narrative? I don't know. I don't know if anybody can give a definitive narrative on the early days of the culture.
So now I have two of the greatest living legends of hip-hop, Joe Conzo and Paradise Gray, to set my story straight. Wild. I never knew a You Had to Be There could take this direction. Back to Joe on his ascension into arriving to legendary status in the hip-hop world.
It took 30 years for me to become famous, so to speak, or noticed. But, I never gave up my dream to become a successful photographer. And I had amassed a body of work of over 10,000 images that now sit at Cornell University's hip-hop collection. I mean, my negatives sit on the same shelf as the Gettysburg Address.
Well, they should.
How fucking cool is that? How fucking cool is that? You know what I mean?
Yeah. And I think that it makes sense
so
to me.
Fucking dope. That is so fucking dope. You know? And, even though I did 27 years as a paramedic with the New York City Fire Department, that was my bread and butter. That was my 9 to 5. It gave me a pension. It gave me, health benefits. But I never gave up my passion for photography.
That's
and
so cool.
When I did my first exhibition with my dear, dear, dear good friend Johan Kugelberg, we got to travel the world. And next thing you know, I'm going to my captain saying, listen, I'm going to Korea next week. Can I take a week off? I'm like, go ahead, Joe, you got vacation time. And the rest is history. I mean, this kid that you're speaking to, this man, I've been to Bulgaria. I've been to Japan, Korea, Germany, London. I just came back from Amsterdam for the 10th time, 10th year in a row. So I'm so grateful and humble. And people respect me as a photographer, A, because of my body of work, and B, because I respect the people that I take pictures of, that I shoot, so to speak. Wow. And, I can, I can be with LL Cool J, at one of his events, and he'll be like, oh, that's Joe, don't worry about it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Fat Five Freddy describes me as that fly on the wall. Oh, that's Joe, don't worry about it. People feel comfortable around me because I respect their space and I respect who I'm shooting.
Yeah.
And I'm grateful for that.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. Back to Paradise. So I guess my question is, as somebody that is so knowledgeable and knowing that a lot of this is myth and legends, how does that make you feel? Is it just...
It makes me feel great. Sometimes spoken history exaggerates here or there, but if you get enough corroborating information, you could actually glean some real important hip-hop history out of spoken words and people telling their stories. Every different community has a different story. There's a Kool Herc everywhere.
I unfortunately did not find someone who was at the 1973 back-to-school party. I am unclear if it's because it didn't happen or if I just had bad luck. I'm left with the question, did Herc invent the merry-go-round? It seems that most people agree that he did, including Grandmaster Flash and Questlove, two of our most outspoken hip-hop aficionados. But there are plenty of skeptics. And I suppose for me, does a good origin story really need to be the truth? So, in thinking about an old film I studied in high school, The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance, there's a quote from this character Maxwell who says, "When the legend becomes fact, print the legend." I'm not even really sure if the people that say it's fact really believe it's fact. And at the end of the day, does it really matter? I suppose it does, for me, who got this assignment and failed. But for the rest of us, why not just go with this origin story? It's a good one.
You Had to Be There is a Hi Barr production, created by Hi Barr. All episodes written, edited, and hosted by Julia Thompson. Produced by Julia Thompson and Webb Barr. Additional editing, sound mix, and engineering by Vishal Nayak. Opening score by Teeny Lieberson. Artwork created by Dylan Lathrop. Special thanks to our parents, friends, and chosen family. And most importantly, thank you to the artists who have inspired us, because they had to do it.